Hi, yes, I think we are officially ready to begin. So I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. You're warmly welcome to today's webinar brought together by the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory with our partner, the Africa Climate Foundation, ACF. So today we are very excited that we can all join to have this very important conversation. For the ACCPA, we are an African-led think tank that focuses on the engagement between African countries and of course, China. And our work is to engage in knowledge production, creating platform for conversations, and of course, broadening the conversation, effecting policy change, especially on the side of the African continent, and of course, trying to, amplify the African agency when it comes to the continent's engagement with China. So basically, that's what we're doing. And as part of our work, in recent times, we've been very much focused on issues related to climate related themes. And so we're working on a project that is dubbed the Sino-Africa Green Finance Alliance, which is a project tracking the flow of finance coming to the African continent for green purpose, especially the ones that target green industrialization, manufacturing, green manufacturing. So basically, that's what we're trying to do. And in that project, we are very much zooming on that of China's involvement in terms of that landscape of financial flow into African continent. And so it involves a series of activities, and a core part of it is the sort of engagement that we are having, which mostly is backed by the sort of findings that we've identified, and then how we can bring together thought leaders who can share perspectives, give critical insights, and that can hopefully be a part of that advocacies that we are running to ensure policy change across countries in Africa. Of course, we have country focus, which is Ghana and Ethiopia, that we're working on under this flagship project, which is supported by the African Climate Foundation, which is Africa's leading grantor when it comes to climate-related issues on the continent. So they are the supporters of the project that we are working on. Very excited to have all of you join us for today's webinar. So the webinar focuses on the role of the Belt and Road Initiative. I want to believe that all of us on this very meeting might have one way or the other heard about BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. If you haven't, I'm hopeful that by the time we finish this webinar, you might have more broader perspective from our distinguished guests who will be sharing their perspective with us. So we are looking at how the BRI fits into Africa's green transition and climate agenda across the continental, regional level, of course, country level. As we know, the elevation of the climate crisis conversation is very important. So we try to see how the BRI, as we've seen, launched in 2013, by China to President Xi Jinping, which is trying to connectivity, infrastructure development, digital hard infrastructure, and all of that. So we will try to see how this global initiative by China, how that is can or should respond to the sort of green transition agenda of the African continent. And to do that, today we are very privileged to have two distinguished guests, one from China, one from Africa. As you can see, very make it very diverse in that way, so that we can get a perspective from China, of course, a perspective from the African scholarly point of view as well. So the format of the webinar is very simple. The first part is that we'll give each of our guest speakers between 15 to 20 minutes for them to share their perspective. After that, we will have about 15 to 20 minutes of panel discussion. So that will be questions that I will lead. So I'll ask questions, some of them based on their presentations. And then after that, we'll all welcome questions from you participants. So all of us on this very important webinar, you have the opportunity to ask your questions. And so I will indulge all of us to use the Q&A button on the Zoom app. If you're familiar with the Zoom app, there's a Q&A button there. That's where you're supposed to ask your questions. So if you put your questions there, I will then read the question out to our speakers. If you want, you can be specific. If you want the question to be answered by a particular speaker, you can mention the speaker's name, or it's a general question, you can just put it there, and hopefully we'll get very good answers from our speakers. Then again, too, you can later on reach out to our speakers via LinkedIn. They're very much active there. You can send them follow-up questions, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to engage you on those very important questions. But this has been brought to you by the ACCPA, the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. My name is Paul Frimpong. I'm an executive director of the center. And so I will just briefly introduce our guest speakers for today's webinar on the role of BRI in Africa's green transition. This webinar is recorded, so after the session, we'll prep it and then have it available on our YouTube channel. And of course, we will share it via socials and also via email. I'm sure you got a couple of emails from us leading to this webinar. The same way we'll send you the recorded version. So those of you who are doing research or want to go back to get some insights, you can just rewatch it. So that is a bit of an announcement there. So I'll just briefly introduce our speakers. So the first speaker to introduce is Dr. 𝐃𝐚𝐭𝐞, who is currently a research assistant professor at the National School of Development and the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University, which is based in Beijing. She's also the Deputy General Secretary of the Peking University Center for African Studies. She serves as a council member of the China-Africa Research Association, a council member of the Africa-China History Research Association, and the editorial board member for the English Journal of Vocation, Technology and Education. She holds a dual title PhD in adult education, as well as international comparative studies from College of Education at the Pennsylvania State University in the US, and an MA in international educational development from Teachers College, Columbia University. So ladies and gentlemen, that is our first guest speaker, Dr. 𝐃𝐚𝐭𝐞, joining us from Beijing, Peking University. So Tawan, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Can you hear? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for your warm welcome. And also, I would like to say hello to the online friends and colleagues who are at Zoom with us. Thank you for your valuable time to be with us today. I prepared a topic that I have been lately doing research about, so I would like to share some of our research with you, and looking forward to a discussion with you. Okay, now let me
Just before you share
yeah.
your slide, I would like to introduce our second panelist as well. So this is Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, who of course we're very familiar with. We worked with him a couple of times. So he is the Director of Research at the Center for China-Africa Studies at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He is an Africa-China scholar. His bachelor's degree from St. Joseph Theological Institute in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and an honors degree in political science from the same university. His research interest in Africa-China relations emerged after his honors degree, and his master's dissertation was based on China and South Africa relations. His doctoral dissertation, also done at the KwaZulu-Natal University of KwaZulu-Natal, was a constructivist analysis of Sino-Zambian relations. So while he has done a lot of publications, of course, in recent times, he's very much focused on the main interest is on the growing China-Africa relations. So ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to welcome Dr. Emmanuel Matambo from the China-Africa Studies, Center for China-Africa Studies from the University of Johannesburg. So Emmanuel, you're welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Paul, and greetings to all the colleagues and to Dr. Chan and Dr. Wan. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So Jinjay, please, you have the floor now. You may turn on your video and you can share your screen and of course, share your perspective with us. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Let me share the screen. Okay. Hi, hello, everyone. I'm going to use the following 20 minutes or so to introduce a topic on China's NEV, is a new energy vehicle, and its green cooperation with BRI countries. Here, I choose 3 countries, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Nigeria, as our case studies to talk about how China cooperated with them. This is a research we conducted from last year till now. We had the field trip, visited these 3 countries to understand the China's EV business in there and how the cooperation going on. So my talk today will include 2 parts. The first part I want to talk about, because China has a very fast development in the electric vehicles. So I want to introduce about China's situation, how we developed our new electric vehicle, and in terms of a policy and in terms of our import and export related to this industry. That's the first part I want to share with you. The second part I am going to discuss about is these research we newly conducted, this 3 countries research, what we discovered, and how does that relate to a broader perspective towards China's cooperation in this green cooperation with African countries. So first of all, I want to talk about in China, our dual carbon strategy. A dual carbon strategy is, we call it carbon peaking and a carbon neutrality, which means no longer the emission of CO2 no longer rises, and also there is a net zero emissions. So we have these 2 goals, 2 strategies. We call it dual carbon strategy. It's a national strategy. It's partially of our 14th 5-year plan. So this national plan has been guiding the development of the industry, so shows the policy measures are very important in terms of the industry development, for the green development. For this dual carbon strategy, our country has the goal to accept under some emergency situations, all public sectors vehicles will be fully electrified for the follow-up 5 years plan. And also we have a from fuel to electric incentive policy for private owned passenger cars. So by that, we will convert from gasoline to electric powers. I'll introduce more on that. And by this year, we have accumulated a new electric vehicle in Beijing. Has, by the end of this year, will be reach 2 million cars. So that's all the goals we set up from the policy wise. And when you look at the NEV market in China, you see probably our country now is the leading country in terms of the NDE, not only domestically, but also internationally. From these increase of these China's NEV sales, you would see only 10 years, this industry has been developing very, very fast. And a growth rate year by year, we see a tremendous growth. One of the reasons is because of very consistent policy supporting this green transition and green development. And in last year, in our country, our NEV penetration reached almost half compared with the gasoline filled cars. So you see from 2018 till now, it's only 7 years. Our penetration rate almost reach a half of the total amount. So that's a big increase in terms of a green transition in our country. And there are three reasons drive these fast green development in this industry. First of all, is the supply side push, because in our country we have a newly developed for the past 10 years the EV industry and EV company. You probably heard about BYD and some Li Auto or Ito. Those are all the famous brand of an EV in our country. Their production rate, growth rate are year by year, a very high percentage of the productivity ability and also the market share. Secondly is because the demand side preference. Our Chinese people, they prefer PHEV cars. PHEV cars is not purely electric cars. It's not purely fuel cars. It's more like a combination of both. So they can use electricity powered and also can use fuel powered. So this is very welcomed and favored by the Chinese customers. So that's the demand side preferences in China. And because electric powered cars is cheap, and the fuel cars will give them a sense of dependency while they run out of the electricity. So that's a very good combination. And also the policy support, as I mentioned before, we have the dual carbon strategy. Other than that, we have very, very specific. I just listed a few of them. They have the vehicle purchase taxation reduction and the road maintenance fee waived, and also exempt the vehicle and vessel taxes, and consumption taxes also reduced or exempted, and also the charging infrastructure are more and more popular. All those policy supported development build up a very user-friendly market for our country to imply this NEV industry strategy. And after you look at our domestically situation, I wanted to share about more for our export. You see, not only our domestic production activity increased a lot, but also for our exports. You see, from 2018 till last year, we see a big change in terms of exports. Probably in your own country, you would see there is a China branding EV cars in your country as well. So because the Chinese companies, car companies, they have very good productivity abilities. So they not only sell the cars domestically, but also exports to the other countries. When we look at the EV cars export volume by regions, we see South America will be a high growth destination, and also North America and then Africa as well. We see more and more cars go to Africa, but you see there's a drop in European. You know the reason, because of the increased tariff. So we don't have that much car imported to Europe anymore. In terms of country-wise, we see the United Arab UAE has largest, one of the largest, and also Mexico are our destinations received our cars. Now let's, after we talk about China, we look at the Africa situation, because we wanted to understand how these the car market in the African countries. We have these a number of registered vehicles, a number of vehicle per capita, to have some documented data for different sub-Saharan African countries. We see South Africa, Nigeria, they all ranking the top registered vehicles. And those are the background information, help us to provide information for us to choose the specific case that we want to take a closer look at. And the previous slides is just about the ordinary cars and the fuel cars. And now we look at the EV cars. Ghana rank the top 1 among the top 5 African countries in new energy vehicle. So they have the EV stocks, the highest number of EV stock. And also we see some other countries like Ethiopia and Egypt are two countries that we chose to study, and also they have a good amount of EV stock in their countries. And also we study the EV policies because we know how important the industry policy related to the industry development. We take a very close look at South Africa, Kenya, and Zimbabwe, Zambia, Ethiopia, etc., those countries to study their regulations, incentives, infrastructures, demand, and industry development, and capacity building, etc. So we choose different development stage of countries in terms of EV. That's why we come up with a couple of questions to find out what are the market demand in those countries, and how the regulatory and policy environment being ready for it, and infrastructures and ecosystems, how does that be ready for the EV industry. So these are the three countries we eventually, through a screening of all the background information, we choose Egypt, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. The reason is Nigeria has the largest population. So normally, if we see the cooperation, the more people, the assumptions that the more people you have, the more cars you could use. And also Ethiopia is a large population country as well. It's located to the east, and Egypt is to the north of African continent, and it also has a very large population. So we choose these three countries as our destinations to study. This is some research methods. Since last year, that we have a 3-4 month field trip to those three countries to discover the three research questions. Because of the time constraint, I might not talk about each of my slides. I'll do really quick. So this is, we compared their macro level of data, background information about GDP and household disposal incomes and trade balance. So, and also compare with China, we find out if they have some advantages to absorb those cars in their own country, and how that the situation would be happening in their countries. And also there is the very significant disparities in the vehicle ownership in different countries. In Nigeria, they have the highest ownership by countries, then followed by South Africa and then Egypt, and also Kenya. So you see Nigeria is the highest, and maybe Egypt is in the middle, and Kenya is 70%. Among those big countries, they are a little bit far behind. So that's the three countries we choose to look at. And we also compared these vehicle market and policies to find out how in different countries their policy-wise value-added taxations and consumptions taxes and additional taxes. So these are all provided some data for us to understand these three countries. I'm going to come to the conclusion soon. For Ethiopia, when we're in Ethiopia, we see the vehicles from 1970s to 1990s on the road. It seems like time traveling. You can see different times of cars in different from different times. But also we, as many other African countries, you see more Japanese and Korean cars than Chinese cars. However, because Ethiopia started to have implemented the fuel, sort of banned the fuel vehicle imported to their country, only allow or welcoming EV cars to be imported. So this industry policy is very important. We, based on our study, we discovered for the 6 months after this new policy, industry policy implemented, we see over thousands, 10,000s of new EVs being imported to Ethiopia right away. Over 80% of the new cars are being Chinese brand new EV cars. And also we saw those cars all have the logos here, the Chinese logos, and also their screen in the car vehicle screen are having a Chinese system. Not been localized yet, but they have English as well. And also we see the different Chinese cars from different channels, sourcing channels. But the competition, only 6-8 months, the competitions for the EV car become more and more severe because there are more cars go to this country. Then they have a very big competition between Chinese companies. This is one of the cases we spend most of the time is the Jet Tour. Jet Tour is a Chinese brand, and they are very doing a very good business with the local market. And to conclude about Ethiopia, Ethiopia has a fast improvement in terms of EV cars, Chinese EV cars imported because of the industry policy. That's a very obvious variables we discovered. And for Nigeria, I saw someone raise the hand, but I think we're going to answer questions and discussions more. Here is just some brief information. In Nigeria, they near the port, we see the car tradings spreading and the second car everywhere. It surprised us in Nigeria, even though they have the largest population, but don't have many EV cars, Chinese EV cars, as much as in Ethiopia. The reason is because it's road constructions and the weather, as we find out, and also they don't have industry policy to support it. So in terms of the car business, we see the huge difference. There are some of the videos, because of the time I couldn't show to you, but I will move to next. And then we find that this Carloha is a Chinese-owned company in the local area. It's been very successful. They have the after-sales services quite successful. Then it boosted the market in a very good way. Egypt is a place we saw a car industry park. So if the green transition for Ethiopia is because of its policy, industry policy. Nigeria doesn't have a big transition happening. It's because it's a lack of industry policy and infrastructure. So for Egypt is very promising in terms of green transition for the car business because they very value the infrastructure. We know industry park is infrastructure. In that industry park and a car park, they have all this gathered business together, become forming a very good business environment. So the infrastructure as the car business locations are very important. So we see either you have the policy ready or you have the infrastructure ready, so the green transition can happening. So here I go to my conclusion for this 3 countries. Okay, I remember at the beginning we mentioned we wanted to understand the 3 questions for each of the country. One is the market and demand analysis. So we see the market demand in Ethiopia is very high. Egypt is increasing, but for Nigeria is limited, but they have a growing interest. There are some key drivers for the Ethiopia is its government policy and a low price in the electricity provision. So, and overseas remittance is also a reason. But for Egypt and Nigeria, Nigeria lack of electricity is a big obstacle for the green transition and cooperation with China. So, and also for policy-wise, Ethiopia have very good policy that they fuel car ban policy make its a good potential market for the EV industry. And for Egypt, they have incentives for manufacturing, for the infrastructures. So it's also set up some foundations. But for Nigeria, we see it's limited. They show interest to reducing the emission. However, it's still under development. But also, they have the charging infrastructure and ecosystems. They have all different. For Ethiopia, because they have the civil conflict, not very stable societal business environment. That might be an obstacle. But for Egypt, they have a rapid development in Cairo and major cities. We see this potential in there as well. But Nigeria needs to be quickly develop its roads and overcome the dealing with the corruption issues. So that's going to attract more Chinese investors. So lastly, I wanted to talk about some takeaways. We see China's NEV cooperation with Africa. We present a strategic blue ocean, a huge opportunity. Successful hinges on aligning technology transfer, capacity building, and the regulatory facilitation to unlock long-term sustainable growth. Very, very confident to see this green cooperation in terms of NEV industry. However, there are some issues we need to consider from the academic point of view, also policy point of view. We see the global hostiles, especially for European countries, to the Chinese NEV products. So we were wondering whether the emerging markets will be an opportunity in Africa. Even that's a very important question. That's why we conducted our research, and we also needed to know in those countries, African countries, how to dealing with the shortage of related workforce, right? New industry, you needed to have a new prepared workforce education to host those industry, to provide a more related workforce. Otherwise, only industry, no education, no workforce, there will be a huge gap. So skilled training is very important for new related to the green transition industry, and also infrastructure gap, right? So good infrastructure will facilitate better green transitions, especially for the green development. They need infrastructure. And if the policy are very good, very welcoming, however, if it's not stable, not consistent, that also cause a uncertainty in terms of China and African country cooperations. And there are more I want to discuss with you later. Thank you very much. Okay, Paul, let me stop here.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Wan. That was very insightful presentation linking China's NEV as a benchmark when it comes to green transition in Africa, especially in the three country cases that you pick. Looking at the market demand analysis, the policy and regulatory environment, of course, infrastructure, which is very key. We have a series of questions that I will follow up, but that will be after we hear from Emmanuel Matambo, who will also be sharing his perspective with us for the next 15-20 minutes. To our participant, if you have questions regarding the presentation done by Dr. 𝐃𝐚𝐭𝐞, we will come back to that. So please send your questions through the Q&A button. That will be very much helpful, so that after Emmanuel, then we can zoom in with the Q&A session. So please do send your questions via the Q&A button, so that if you can be specific. If you want to ask Dr. 𝐃𝐚𝐭𝐞, you can do that. If you want to ask Emmanuel too, you can do that. Or if you have a general question, you can do that also. So Emmanuel, please, you have the floor now to share your perspective with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory and the African Climate Foundation as well. And thanks to Dr. 𝐃𝐚𝐭𝐞. It's an honor to meet you, Doctor, and that presentation that you made there prepared very good ground on which I'm going to build my presentation as well, which speaks more specifically to the Belt and Road Initiative and Africa's green transition. And thanks for the people who have made time as well to join. I can see some familiar faces in those who are attending, so thanks once again. The overview of the presentation will have to start from a general perspective of the issue of climate change before we obviously zoom in onto the issue, the specific issue of what green...
Emmanuel,
yes?
possible to turn on your video? Your video is off.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. I hope this is fine now.
Yeah, this is better. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So we will start, first of all, from a general overview about climate change. And like a lot of things that happen in the world, Africa will be the most adversely affected continent or region in the world when it comes to climate change, which is why it is so bizarre that you have countries such as the United States today that are being led by governments that are climate skeptics. That is the name they have been given now. So it is quite dispiriting really for the rest of the world, especially Africa, because climate change seems to be real. I'm sitting in South Africa right now, where last week floods in the Eastern Cape of South Africa claimed lives that stand today at 90, which is the death toll that is set to increase beyond 90. In Kinshasa as well, we woke up to the news that about 25 people have lost their lives due to floods as well in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these are just some specific examples that demonstrate most vividly the issue of climate change, environmental degradation, and the deadly impact that they have, not only on Africa as a continent, but on specific communities as well. So the continent will be disproportionately affected, even though it only contributes about 3.7% of carbon dioxide emissions from combustible fuels. These are figures from 2022 there. Note that the continent is alone in noticing the dangers that come with climate change. This was noted by Kofi Annan, who was a former UN Secretary General in 2005 when he endorsed the African Green Revolution, and then it was also supported by the African Union at the 2006 Abuja Africa Fertilizer Summit then. So the core of the matter when we talk about green transition is that Africa will have to accomplish its development aspirations, but at the end of the day, do them in such a way that is sustainable to the environment and in such a way that does not injure local communities. I think that is the crux of what we say when we talk about green transition. Yes, we want the development that has historically been done by energy that was accumulated from coal, but at the same time as well, we want development that is more sustainable. I will zero in on that more specifically when I talk about the small and beautiful model that President Xi Jinping of China spoke about in 2021, but that comes later. But here was just me giving a brief background of what exactly green transition means for Africa. Let me just go to the next slide. Yes, as I said, the African Union has not remained dormant. It has its own 2021 to 2027 Green Recovery Action Plan, and it has the first 5 priority areas there that I have copied there. The first is climate financing, which includes flows, the increasing flows, efficiency, and impact of funding, which projects are going to be funded, and then support for renewable energy as well. I want the colleagues who are listening in to keep this in mind because it ties in very well with what the Belt and Road Initiative has embarked upon as well. So there is support, renewed support for renewable energy. Here in South Africa, there are specific Chinese companies that have been involved in renewable energy in the Northern Cape of South Africa, specifically zeroing in on wind energy. And then the third priority today is the nature-based solutions and focus on biodiversity through works on sustainable land management, forestry, oceans, and ecotourism as well. Resilient agriculture, very pivotal, especially in Africa, where for a long time we have been tied to our chronic dependency on coal on the part of South Africa for energy. So yes, there has to be a reduction on fossil fuels that drive agriculture on the African continent, and then green and resilient cities as well, which include a focus on water and enhancing information, communication, and technology as well. So this just shows that, yes, there is movement on the part of the African continent as well to make sure that as we foster development of the African continent, we also keep an eye, so to say, on environmental husbandry. Now, before I now talk about the BRI, what arguments I'm emanating from there, as an academic, I should state that this debate on the Belt and Road Initiative and its impact on Africa's environment has been laden with ideological and methodological standpoints, debates, and dissent. And this comes because of precisely because the Belt and Road Initiative was initiated by China. And as you know, we are now entering an era whereby China's ventures into the rest of the world are hotly debated, partly because China is a new player, so to say, on the global stage. It was centuries ago, and then it kind of sank into the doldrums. But from 1978, early 1980s to now, we have seen that there has been a revival of China's footprint the world over. And because of that, the United States, led by its NATO allies, led by its European allies, led by even its post-World War allies such as Japan, Australia, New Zealand, are very skeptical about the impact of the rise in China. And that skepticism is not only tailored towards China's growing economy or China's growing political influence, but even China's growing influence, such as they are expressed in the Belt and Road Initiative, and even in the issue of climate change. So yes, this is hotly contested, and my presentation will show you just now that depending on where you are based, ideologically or even geographically, your argument on the Belt and Road Initiative and its impact on green transition in Africa is kind of framed through that worldview. China Daily, for example, predictably talks about the positive impacts of China's Belt and Road Initiative on African communities. Yale University speaks more critically, predictably again, because these are United States institutions. They are very, very reluctant to give China any credit. The Institute for Security Studies, I found the data from the Institute of Security Studies based here in South Africa to be more balanced. They enhance African agency, whilst at the same time they tell us not to be blind to the possible adverse impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative on the continent. African participants in the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, I have a table, I have a graphic that I will present on just how enthusiastically Africa has embraced the Belt and Road Initiative. And that, again, influences how Africa looks at the Belt and Road Initiative. Incumbent African governments are more sanguine, more optimistic about the Belt and Road Initiative, while opposition political parties, environmental activists, especially in the case of Uganda, where the Entebbe-Kampala Expressway elicited a lot of criticism, mostly from local communities and environmental activists. So again, even in Africa, we see that there is a layered and diverse approach on the effects of the Belt and Road Initiative and Africa's environmental situation. So yes, some speak more optimistically and they laud the Belt and Road Initiative, while others do not. So I want the colleagues who are listening in to just keep that in mind as I do the rest of the presentation here. So the Belt and Road Initiative, for colleagues that might not know, is perhaps the most ambitious infrastructure program ever initiated. It follows the ancient Silk Road that extended from China to the eastern part of Asia as well. The current Belt and Road Initiative has two main facets. Initially, it had two main facets: the Silk Road Initiative belt, and then there's a maritime belt, which now traverses the seas and it extends from China to other parts of Africa. But as I will show you later on, even landlocked countries in Africa have signed onto the Belt and Road Initiative because it has become more diverse. It is not just tailored to road network infrastructure. So it has become more tailored there. And yes, 63% of people that signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. We're talking about 4.4 billion people across the world that have signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative there. In terms of trade volumes, it is estimated to boost global GDP by up to 7.1 trillion. And Africa has signed by 2020, between 2020, 2013, when the BRI was initiated. It was initiated that year in Kazakhstan formally. Africa has signed onto deals that amount to 700 billion United States dollars. So within that 10-year period there, it is estimated to reduce trade costs by 2.2% by 2040. Obviously, we are 15 years from there. Yes, but then despite all this, it has also been fraught with environmental hazards, and we should be alive to that factor, especially as academics. It can't be an infallible project. As a human project, it is fallible, and we should be alive to some of those hazards that the BRI causes, such as the 1,600 coal power plants that were suggested before 2021. 2021 was a key year because it was a year when at the United Nations, in September of that year, President Xi Jinping said China will commit itself not to build more coal facilities the world over. So that happened in 2021, and it was because he had realized the environmental degradation, the environmental hazards that came with the BRI. In 2023, at the Belt and Road Initiative Forum, so the Belt and Road Initiative Forum has been held serially since the introduction of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think Paul, if I'm not mistaken, has attended one or probably several of these Belt and Road Initiative Forums. So at the 2023 segment, President Xi Jinping reiterated the fact that China will have to be smart. By smart, I mean we have to be greening its Belt and Road initiatives in Africa and the developing world mostly. This here is just an illustration of how enthusiastically African countries have signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. 44 partners from Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the biggest number we can see there, followed, interestingly, by Europe, and then followed by East Asia, and then followed by Latin America and the Caribbean, and then 19 in the Middle East and North Africa, and then South Asia, 6 countries. And it is because obviously South Asian countries have historically been suspicious, so to say, of China, especially when the Belt and Road Initiative, before it changed its name to the Belt and Road Initiative, it was called the One Belt, One Road. And for a lot of people, that had an ideological undertone, and they said, okay, it's a Sino-centric paradigm then if it's a One Belt, One Road. So that is why, to make it more inclusive, they transformed the name to the Belt and Road Initiative. But South Asia has still been skeptical about it being a Sino-centric project, China projecting its influence the world over. Brahim Chelani from India came up with the concept of the debt trap diplomacy, saying that initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative are China's traps, so to say, to ensnare developing countries into debt. So what is China doing in terms of its Belt and Road Initiative and sustainability? I spoke about the coal plants that Xi Jinping said China was not going to continue. President Xi Jinping said, though, that those projects that were already underway would be seen to their conclusion, because there are some that were already under construction in 2021 there. Although obviously critics have said the Belt and Road Initiative prioritizes economic growth at the expense of the environment. This is the criticism that was actually launched against China as well. They said China and the United States still today usually dominate when it comes to emissions of toxic gases, and it is because they said China's massive industrialization came at the expense of the environment. So these are alarming numbers again. Fossil fuels make up 80% of China's overseas energy investments through the Belt and Road Initiative. That has to be curbed, with only 3% going to solar and wind. Obviously, these are the numbers that will have to be changed. And obviously, China has made some undertakings in that as well, although in the long run, that will obviously necessitate China to make sure that it dumps some of its coal power plants and reduce oil extractions, but this is more at the Arctic circle, really, not on the African continent. And then this slide here continues with some of the initiatives that China has noted. In 2018, the Green Finance Committee of China and the City of London introduced the Green Investment Principles for the BRI. Again, here we see China working in concert even with European partners to make sure that they attend to the issue of the Belt and Road Initiative and the concerns, the environmental concerns that it comes with. I would like to draw people's attention to the document titled "The Opinions on the Joint Implementation of Green Development in the Belt and Road Initiative." This was crafted in 2022 in March, and it was authored by the National Development and Reform Commission of China, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Energy and Environment, and the Ministry of Commerce. So we see that it is a multi-pronged opinion here that commits China to the following: to reduce emissions and pollutions while protecting biodiversity in BRI nations, of which, as we saw, Africa has 44 participants. It also committed to that the committee will facilitate the full implementation of the Paris Agreement. Here again, remember what I said at the beginning, drawing some comparisons with what has been happening in the United States. We saw that the United States is now withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. The opinions published by those departments of China commit China to the Paris Agreement there. It was inspired by the BRI International Green Development Coalition. The Green Development Coalition again brings people from a broad spectrum, both from China and outside China, and it inspired those opinions there. And we have seen that China has taken up that baton. In 2023, when it announced that 21.7 billion BRI funding had been dedicated to Africa, a considerable part of that actually went to renewable energy. The following part there just speaks glowingly about the Belt and Road Initiative in China. Again, the authors of that particular article there that I said were talking about the BRI as being a positive impact on the East African environment. Some of the authors were Chinese. Again, remember the caveat that I said at the beginning, those who are China-facing, Africa-facing usually speak glowingly about the BRI. And then obviously in 2021, the small and beautiful model, the one that I spoke about at the beginning as well, it emphasizes green and prudent projects. Now, this is important because in the past, China used to look at mega projects that are kind of shock and awe, such as the standard gauge railway in Kenya. These are projects that are ostentatious and you cannot miss them. But China has realized that some of them were unsustainable because African countries could not really repay the debt. So the small and beautiful model looks at how can we develop Africa at a smaller level and at a more sustainable level. So all that is actually attributed to some of the Belt and Road Initiative. Here are just some of the specific cases I would give as well. In 2015, the Lamu-Ko project that was earmarked in Kenya was later cancelled in 2020 because it was at the heritage site, a heritage environmental site in Kenya, so that was cancelled. The Shenzhen Group, this was actually in Ghana, the Shenzhen Group agreed to build a 7,000 megawatt coal power plant in Ghana's 𝐾𝐚𝐭 district. It was earmarked at 1.5 billion. The environmentalists have been very critical of that as well. The Sengwa project in Zimbabwe. This is kind of controversial because the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China said there were reports that it had withdrawn. And then in 2022, it was announced again by Rio-Zim that the ICBC had not actually withdrawn. So there is kind of a gridlock there, an impasse there, and people not knowing exactly how it was, because it came in the same year when China was saying that we are no longer going to sponsor core projects. So that is why I guess there was some controversy there, although the project was worth 3 billion. But China has been more proactive in sponsoring the Kariba hydroelectric power dam, which Zimbabwe shares with Zambia. So that, to a lot of people, was China moving towards a more sustainable energy production on the African continent. The Mambila hydroelectric power plant in Nigeria is actually said to be the biggest hydroelectric power plant in Nigeria. It is also partly funded by China, and it also goes to show that China is moving, so to say, it's kind of living up to its promises of abandoning its dependency on coal overseas, even though China has already been doing it in China itself. I'll be happy to entertain questions. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. That was very insightful, more broader in scope, looking at the Africans, energy transition, and of course, running us through the angles. I think that was very important, depending on where you stand or where you sit, the frame that you're looking through to judge or kind of do your assessment. I think is very key in that perspective, so that you know where the source is and how that is shaping the conversation on the real impact of the BRI on Africa's energy transition. So thank you very much. So we would like both of you to turn on your video, both Emmanuel and 𝐏𝐚𝐿, so that we can begin the Q&A session. I think we've got a lot of questions here. So I will start with those ones, whilst in the course of it, I'll also come in with some of my questions. I think I have a question. We're starting with the question that is directed for Dr. Wan. So this one is from Kuda, and I think it's very important. He's speaking to the issue about infrastructure, which is about targeting the poor, coming. So the question is to Dr. Wan. He said, thank you for your research. Is that on the focus of your research method on cars per capita, does this include public transportation and EVs? Being able to focus on public transportation can assist in providing a view if Africa's energy poor communities have some access to energy transition through uses of public transportation, because in most of the I think the analysis that we got from Ethiopia, Egypt, and Nigeria, more about, you give us the sense that you gave us was more about the private, transport ownership sort of. But we work within societies where public transportation is a very core part of the everyday life of the ordinary citizen. So the question is about how does that come about? Did you look at the public transportation so that we can see how the impact is on the energy poor communities that we have? So that's the question that we have from Kuda. I don't know if I can add the next question, which also speaks to infrastructure. You can read the question yourself when you scroll down the page on the Q&A. It's from Femilo, who is a senior economist at the energy transition at the German Institute for Development and Sustainability in Germany. So it's about infrastructure. This question speaks to infrastructure. So again, also directed at Dr. Wan. As many African countries face frequent blackouts, which is of course energy, lack of energy, so limited grid capacity and dependence on fossil-based generation. Widespread EV charging without power grid upgrades can strain systems, especially if charging occurs during peak times, raising costs or triggering outages. How do we reconcile energy security, poverty in African states with the rollout of EV? So these are two, mostly around the one is energy, the lack of ability, and of course, one is the public, the energy poor communities access to EV through public transport. If you did any the analysis or the research really touch on that. So those are the two questions that I believe you can address now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Emmanuel, for this wonderful talk. You understand and try to analyze our country's policy and the BRI, and I learned quite a lot from Emmanuel as well. Thank you so much. And now let me go to the questions from our two friends online. So first, thank you, Kuda, for this very insightful question. You mentioned about this private car, and what about this public one? That's a great question. When we were in Ethiopia, we actually not only studied about the private vehicle, but also we look at the public transportations. We discovered that Ethiopia purchased the public transport EVs such as electric buses or mini taxis from China. And you're absolutely right that the electrified public transitions is critical for understanding how energy poor communities actually experience the transition, and we see that already happening in Ethiopia. And because again, let's go back to the policy, because they have this fuel car ban policy, so including both a private car and public transportations, they all needed to be an EV. If that's the case, so for government point of view, they need to sponsor or support the public transportations, because obviously the number of these electric buses or mini taxis, they can more functional for the citizens, and that's gonna passengers, especially, they can travel. They can also travel a long distance with the public transportations. So that's happening. When we collecting the data locally, we also see it's really the policy driven is important for because when in our developing countries, including China, we used to be having the same similar situation when our government have very limited resources. What should we do, right? Where should we spend the money on? So that's really depends on the policy makers. What do they value? And if they value the green transition and they're willing to balance the budget to that area and also make it a consistent, we would see it's happening. And especially we see that connection between the rural and urban commuters, and low-income neighborhoods are gaining real access because they have this public transitions. So it's happening, but we cannot say every country in Africa, right? Because if your policy is not there ready, if you have other government prioritized development area, that would be a huge different story. Yes, that's very good question. Talking about, we see it's one of the solutions for the energy poor communities. Actually, they can experience this transition because of this public NEV transportation. That's definitely will expand the geographic access to low-income communities. Yes, for Familo's question, I think that's a great question too. And you talk about the limited access to the electricity, and they need the grid to a great capacity to have the EV car. However, as my observations, I probably don't do much research yet on the grid capacity, but we have PhD students and master students here in China, in Peking University. They always choose the grid capacity as their research topics. I read a lot of their thesis. They talk about the importance of it. And one of my recent just newly graduated students from Nigeria, he conducted a research about the grid capacity from the policy level. It's about the decentralized policy to develop grid capacity. So that's one of the strategies he proposed in his work. So compare with the centralized strategy and a decentralized strategy in terms of grid capacity and electricity capacity development. He discovered the decentralized grid capacity and the electricity government sectors would function much better if it's decentralized. So as again, we see for the electricity capacity, that's the government level issues. In our country, in China, our country take great responsibilities to develop the grid capacity. especially at the very early beginning, because without the grid, it's no way, the grid capacity is no way you can develop other industries, manufacturing. So this is a very important strategy that a country can choose. And I can talk more, but I want to leave more questions for Emmanuel.
Yeah, so there's a follow-up question. I will stay on you again, Dr. Jinjie, before I come to Emmanuel. This follow-up question is from Sahil. He's someone that we are currently working with from the African Climate Foundation. So, and we're glad that he joined us for this very session. So he's asking, it's a follow-up question to the last question that you just answered about the appetite from the Chinese part in terms of assisting with the rollout of, charging infrastructure and moving parts of the EV supply chain to the African market. So far, with the work that you've done, I mean, of course, you started from China, and of course, you came to these select African countries you're looking at. Is there any form of appetite from the Chinese EV market side in terms of, the infrastructure, in terms of charging infrastructure, and of course, even moving part of the supply chain to the African market? Did you get the sense of this, or what did you find out? If you can share that with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sahili. Great question. And yes, normally when we look at the international cooperation, especially for the certain products, let's see, an EV, the first stage, what they do for international business is the international trade, right? They export and import because they don't have this value chain being built up. So they would normally have these imports and exports for the first stage. However, the import and export will only be the first stage. So for African countries, let's say Ethiopia and some other more countries, they not only wanted to purchase this car, but also they wanted to create job opportunities for the local people. That's very important, right? Any international cooperation should be mutual benefit and a mutual help. If that's the case, what do African countries need the most is the job creation, right? To have this industry value chain cooperation after the first stage will get to a more long and sustainable cooperation stage would be the value chain cooperation. Now we see in Ethiopia, and also Morocco, we have a related car business being built up. Maybe at the first stage, they will have only the parts imported and that they have assembly line there. And then when they have more mature workers and build up the initial industry value chain, they started to create their own parts and then sell. Let's say for 5 years from now, they sell the parts to the neighbor countries in Africa. Then the neighbor countries, they can assemble the car, not necessarily to import and export, because import and export just the initial stage. Eventually, China, if you see the model between China and African cooperation, you see we don't just import and export. No, that's just the starter. For long run, and it's already happening, it's the manufacturing, creating more jobs for the young workers. And by that, we're fostering the local business development, the capacity building for the local. So they created jobs, they build up their own industry value chain. So by that, it's a win-win for both China and the domestic needs. This is definitely a China model, China cooperation model, which is technology transfer and spillover effects of the investment. That kind of things happening would definitely be a win-win for both parties. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wan, for that insight. I believe that Sahil got in the feedback. So, Emmanuel, there's a question from Sahil again to you. I think as you in your presentation, you did mention about the whole reorientation and the refocus of China, of course, and rightly so. When these announcements were made, I was in Beijing, part of the BRI forum, about the shift from mega infrastructure project to small and beautiful and sustainable. So he's asking, what has been the reaction? What has been the reception? I mean, what have we picked up from the African side to this model? Obviously, we are not out of the wood yet in terms of the kind of infrastructure that we need. We need infrastructure, huge infrastructure across the continent. So now that the model is shifting from small and beautiful and sustainable, how does that fit in? Of course, first your own brother, I'm just paraphrasing a bit, adding, a bit of things. So basically, what has been the reaction? What has been the reception to this small and beautiful BRI model now? Yeah. You're muted, Emmanuel, please.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Sahel, for that important question there. I think first things first, just like the Belt and Road Initiative itself at its beginning stages here, the same as wherein it was more or less China driven with Africa kind of just bandwagoning along the way. The same has happened as well with the small and beautiful model. It is still taking shape because even in China itself, for example, they haven't really specified exactly what qualifies to be a small and beautiful project. For example, when it comes to electricity generation, they say anything ranging between 10 to 50 megawatts is a small and beautiful project on the African continent. So there is still lack of clarity when it comes to that. But I think the most vivid illustration of how the small and beautiful model has been accepted has been in the area of technological skills transfer. There we see that there has been a lot of impetus and participation on the African continent in terms of the uptake of Chinese technologies. I'll give an example of Luban workshops that have already come. I crudely describe them as a technical aspect or a technical manifestation of the Confucius Institute, wherein the Confucius Institute is more cultural. Luban workshops are more about technical training. And that, I think, has been taken up with alacrity by African countries, Kenya most especially. And then the training of Africans in terms of the skills that are actually needed to green Africa's transition. We saw last year President Xi Jinping pledging that there will be training of about 60,000 African scholars. That is yet to materialize fully. So we will see what the uptake will be. So I think the jury is still out on how Africa has jumped onto that. But what I can say for now has been that, yes, it has been more China-driven. Kenya has been, I think, the most active African partner. We can talk about the gentleman, I've just forgotten his name now. I think he's Mr. Chota or something. He's called Mr. Wi-Fi in Kenya. He is also doing a project that has been graded under the Small and Beautiful Project, providing accessible and more affordable internet provision to Kenyan consumers. But again, we see here that it is a China and Chinese-led initiative on the African continent. A nuanced, as I end, Paul, a nuance to that also will have to be the synergy between what is a multinational corporation in China and what is a private corporation, what is a state-owned enterprise in China and what is a private enterprise in China, and the projects that they deal with on the African continent. That is of utmost importance because then it shows whether or not there's a top-down approach in China's pursuit of the small and beautiful model in the African continent. Is it being pursued by the Chinese government or is it being pursued by private Chinese companies as well? We have to keep that into cognizance. So at the moment, we can simply say flatly that yes, it has been more Chinese-led, not so much African agency coming to the fore, so to say.
So I have a question for you, a follow-up question before Dr. 𝐻𝐽 takes the next question from the participant. So my question is around a key point that you made about the BRI when you just mentioned about a criticism. You mentioned about balancing economic growth and environmental concerns, where you did mention that critics argue that the BRI prioritizes economic growth over environmental integrity. So my question is, how can African countries better negotiate for green conditionalities, in future BRI deals? In this way, we're trying to look at what are the accountability mechanism or safeguards that needs to be in place to ensure that BRI projects do not undermine local environmental sustainability, if there's any, in terms of the balance between economic growth and environmental sustainability.
Thank you very much. I would answer that question from looking at the continent-wide document that I shared, the 2021-2027 recovery plan. What I've noted, I think what kind of undermines our leverage and our agency, not only when we are negotiating with China, but negotiating with the rest of the world, is that most of the times we usually lack the platform on which to negotiate for better deals. I will give you concrete examples between China and specific African countries such as Kenya and South Africa, for example. They negotiate. They do not negotiate as an African continent, and we do not know whether we actually should negotiate as an African continent. We tend at times to negotiate in silos. So there is the document that I shared just now. But at the end of the day, you see countries such as South Africa, for example. I think in South Africa's case and in Zimbabwe's case, the issue is probably more pressing because they are major exporters of coal and their energy sources depend mostly on coal. So maybe that is why they have been proactive in pursuing their private kind of platforms on which to build their leverage as they negotiate with China. But I would say a continent-wide document, such as the African Union document that I shared, would offer Africa more leverage. Although we have to be very realistic, by the way, as we try to make sure that we transition into green energy. Professor Pemelo, who is on this group, and I have been collaborating with a paper, for example, that looks at the adverse impacts of transitioning into green energy from core energy, which will lead into a net unemployment levels in the provinces of Mpumalanga in South Africa and in the Richards Bay area in South Africa as well, where almost entire communities are dependent on coal. So how exactly do we make sure that as we transition, we do not have these adverse impacts on people? The issue became even more exacerbated when Russia's hostilities started with Ukraine, where we saw that Germany, which has been the proponent of the transition towards clean energy, started buying massive amounts of coal in South Africa to lessen its dependency on Russia. So those are just some of the things that Africa should keep in mind as we try to transition. And I think a more continent-wide approach will give us more leverage.
Thank you very much. A more continental approach will give us more. There's a question here that I think Dr. Nyingye, you're trying to answer from Lerato, talking about if you could elaborate on the point you were making on Africa's workforce and its future. I think you made up. So if you can just address that question before we come to other follow-up questions here.
Thank you. That's the question that I would like to answer, because my area is about Africa workforce education and workforce development. When Emmanuel mentioned about Luban workshop and a related project, that's all we took a very close and a follow up those projects for years since its initiation. So yes, as I say, we see the youth, the African youth, is the most valuable asset for the continent. And because not only because of the number of the population, from Chinese point of view, when we look at Africa, we see the huge potential for the African youth. Not only they are the potential customers, but they are also very potential demographic dividend for its own development. So these no matter we talk about NEV, we talk about a green transition, the change is not only outside, the change should happen inside, which is based on the knowledge gathering, the awareness about the importance of the green transition, and also the willingness to develop our nation, develop our country, to engage the community development. All those ideas and mentalities, industrialization mentalities and development mentalities, are all embedded in the education. So we studied different countries about Chinese investment in African countries. I can give you many different examples, but because of the time constraint, I only share one very quick discoveries. In Ethiopia, we randomly selected about 200 local entrepreneurs, Ethiopian local entrepreneurs. In Egypt, we did the same thing, but I take the Ethiopian as example. Among those 200 local Ethiopian entrepreneurs, 40% of them used to work in the foreign companies. this is a very interesting findings. Without the foreign investors, they wouldn't had an opportunity to learn, to absorb the technology transfer from the foreign investors, not necessarily to be China, could it be Indian, Germany, Italian, all those international investors. When they invested in African countries, they build the factories, they have projects. So those engagement and interaction fostering the development, knowledge, and fostering the local entrepreneurship, and also fostering the local business development. If 40% of the local business owners used to work in foreign companies, so those policies to attract foreign investment would create not just to say, oh, I attract investment, so I lose my job. I would lose my assets. No. In that way, it's always a win-win. Engagement with the foreign investors would become more and more, giving your local youth an opportunity to learn formally and informally. So that kind of spillover effects of investment is very huge potential. Even we don't see the GDP change of the manufacturing percentage, but we see the humans' mentality, the workforce knowledge has already been improved. That's huge and very persuasive for us to do cooperation with African countries. By that is not just the cooperation, it's education process mutually happening. Chinese doesn't know Africa's, and the Africans doesn't know the skills and knowledge we brought into, but when we have this international encountering, the learning, the mutual learning happening. So that's the future for African workforce in the upcoming years. And also that's the future for China as well. Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much for that feedback. There's a question here from for Emmanuel from Femelo, asking about how should African policymakers approach political competition between China and other external actors in terms of the continent's energy transition or transition. So of course, obviously, as we are sharing now, we're talking more specifically about China and BRI. Dr. Wan has shared the perspective in terms of the NEV, and you've given us the broader sense. But obviously, we're looking at the continent's transition. There will be other actors as well. So, just briefly, how do you see that shaping up in the next few minutes here?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pemelo, for that question. Indeed, there have been a lot of actors that have been actively involved in Africa's green transition. The European Union, Germany seems to stand out, the United States as well, and of course China. When it comes to this, I think African agency really is all about seeing exactly what is Afrocentric in all the partnerships that the continent has. It is not really the issue as it was during the Cold War, wherein he would decide to choose one partner for another in a game that was actually planned outside of the African continent. Today, actually, we can see that there are actually projects on the African continent that have involved these competing partners to work on a specific project. The projects that are usually tout, and that can also be translated probably even in the energy space, is the Lobito Corridor that has been suggested between the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, and Angola. In the Lobito Corridor, we see for the first time the synergy between the three African countries, the primary African countries involved, the African Development Bank, the European Union, China, and the United States itself. All of them collaborating on a project that it has seen to have long-term benefits for the African continent. So I think that is how to approach the same issue. And obviously, as I spoke about at the beginning of my presentation, to be aware of the fact that there are some detractors of China, there are some supporters of China, and there are some African supporters as well of China against the West. Who comes with issues that are sustainable to the African continent, with issues that are going to align with the Agenda 2063 of the African Union and the Green Recovery Plan that I just proposed, I just touted now. Which partners come to Africa whose ideas are aligned with those platforms? I think that would be of great importance.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. There's a question from Sylvia. Sylvia Sinka is my colleague at the ACCPA. So she's asking Dr. Wan about the opportunity for scaling green transitions in Africa. I don't know whether you'd like to comment. And then you can tie that to just a question. It's more like a request from Tiago, who is doing a research on Ethiopia and struggling to find reliable data on new vehicle sales and segments. So he was asking if it's possible you can share any data source or any sort of information regarding that. So those are the two questions that are a question and of course a request for Dr. Wan. From Sylvia is the first question you can see on the Q&A chat about what opportunities are for Africa in terms of scaling the green transition. Yeah.
Oh, so Paul, we still have time for the questions. I thought we're almost done for the questions.
Yeah, so what do we do is that, okay, so you answer and you wrap up with your final comment basically, and then you can wrap up here. So
Oh, yeah. I think I partially answered Sylvia's question. By the way, thank you so much, Sylvia, for the questions. All our conversation is about the green and transitions. As I say, scaling up for the green transitions couldn't happening very much soon. It takes time, step by step. But when we are looking at the very rich natural resources in Africa, and also, as I mentioned, the huge potential for demographic dividend in Africa, how to unleash the demographic dividend and how to use the natural resources of the continent would be two main questions we need to tackle with. But we see the huge potential, as the last slides of my PowerPoint is, we see this blue ocean. We see blue ocean is more like a metaphor to see it's a huge opportunity, massive of opportunity for us to explore, and we already witnessed to those are happening, and with more and more close tight and cooperation between China and African countries, we make a small step, like Dr. Emmanuel mentioned, the small and beautiful projects. We might have a pilot program to find out it workable, then we expand it to a larger community level or even a national level. That's the China strategy right now, and I think that's also applied to scaling the green transition in one way or another. Each country have its very unique potentials and endowment, so we can't give a one-size-for-all solution. But natural resources and the potential of human capital and demographic dividend are very common two factors for all African countries. We seize those two opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Is that your last comment? You can give your last comment on the discussion, or we can just but the one I'm asking, is that your last comment on presentation? Okay, that's
yeah.
fine.
And I also wanted to say thank you for all the nice questions, and I value this opportunity. I wish we could talk more, but maybe by email or some other opportunities. Thank you.
Emmanuel, also, if you can just get your last comment, or unless there's something in the Q&A that you picked up, but of course we'll just take your last comments. Yeah.
Thank you very much once again, Paul, and thank you to Dr. Wang. I was really honored to share the platform here. I think what we are discussing is probably the most mortal danger right now that faces the world, because as I stated at the beginning about the people that have perished in South Africa and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that the issue of climate change should be upmost. Whatever we do it within this environment that we have to protect. Those with money might entertain the idea of relocating to Mars, but most of us are stuck to this particular continent, and we should make sure that in our small way we try to make sure that we keep our environmental integrity largely intact as Africa. And just by way of closing, I will be sharing with Paul some of the publications that I am currently co-authoring with, among others, Dr. Pemelo Tamasika, who joined us here. So I will share that. It will just be a further debate to what we discussed today. So thank you very much, Paul, and your team and the African Climate Foundation for this wonderful opportunity. I hope that this debate will continue. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Dr. Matambo and of Dr. Wan. We are very much grateful. And of course, a thank you to all the participants that joined us from the beginning to end. I think the rates was very high. We got almost 98% staying from the beginning till now. So we are very much grateful as I was monitoring. It means that the conversation was very captivating as we hear from both our guest speakers. So thank you very much for joining. So this session has been recorded. We will prep it and have it available on our YouTube channel, which we will share via email and of course our socials as well. Again, this has been brought to you by the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory and our flagship Sino-Africa Green Alliance Finance Alliance project supported by the Africa Climate Foundation. Thank you very much, and we hope to come your way soon with other, planned dialogues which revolves around the same Sino-Africa Green Finance Alliance. So thank you, and hope to see all of you again soon. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Manu. Bye.
Bye.